Hey, we're talking about public speaking. How do you speak publicly in a way that actually advances your business, your project, your book, your whatever it is? How do we use public speaking in a strategic way? That's the subject of our conversation today. I've been doing this here, stages, for most of my life, it seems. And yet I don't always know if it's actually helping me or not. So I'm excited about this conversation. I know CEOs, founders, you have to talk. You have to take the stage. You have to take the mic and speak publicly. How do we do that smart? How do we do that well? That's the subject of our conversation today. So, hey again, everybody. My name is Bill Gallagher. I'm the host and scaling coach, host of this fine Scaling Up business podcast. We bring our show to you every week with something to do with growing, scaling your company and the leadership required to get you there. We draw our work from the world of scaling up, and you'll find more than 600 shows over 8 years, wherever you're getting this right now. LinkedIn, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, etc. You can find them all there. But you could also go to scalingcoach.com, where you could also get access to our monthly workshops, our annual strategy and planning stuff. Scalingcoach.com is our website and the place to go to get that, all that stuff. So scalingcoach.com, our workshops, the back catalog, our blog posts, all that kind of thing. We also do a newsletter every couple of weeks, and we update you on things that we're seeing in the world that seem relevant in our shows and posts and that kind of thing. So all that and more, scalingcoach.com. All right. I'm joined now by Blair Bryant Nichols. It's a mouthful, right? Blair, welcome to the show.
Oh, awesome. Thank you, Bill. Great to be here.
Thank you for joining us. So Blair is the owner of BBN Creative Management. He's an expert in building speaking as a strategic platform for your company, helping entrepreneurs, executives, budding subject matter experts in building their world of their public persona around that. So, of course, there's a huge center of this kind of thing in Los Angeles. So he joins us today from LA, where this is a bit of a thing, right? How do we build that public persona, but have it actually serve us, not be some accidental mess of things that we probably shouldn't have said? Or tragic faux pas on a global stage. Blair's MBA is from UCLA Anderson, and anyway, great expert in that, and I'm glad to have you on the show. Let's start off with, I don't know if you've got any horror stories, right? Train wrecks of keynote speaking, yours or clients, that you could share with us.
Yeah, that it happens every once in a while. Like over time, you learn to avoid these types of disasters by not having the wrong people booked. And a lot of the bureaus and the managers will avoid people if anything like this happens. But occasionally, whether it is the speaker's fault or not, events have not gone so well. And there has been a case where it was totally the speaker's fault. And I traveled all the way from New York to Oman, and I'm not even exaggerating, to spend a week with this client preparing for this talk. And when they finally got up to give the talk, they read from a script. It was so bad that the whole audience didn't understand why this person had been chosen to come speak there. And it was so embarrassing. It was, such an expensive trip for them to, put us up and spend the time and everything else. And it was early in my career. And when I first knew, I really loved the management side of being one-on-one with the client. But I got a lot of firsthand experience seeing how it could go really wrong if the ultimate delivery doesn't go so well. I felt like we were fleeing the country the next morning. Like we were couldn't get out of there fast enough, couldn't get on a plane fast enough to just escape from that embarrassing situation. I would say that's not usually the case. That's a rare case, but I've also seen speakers who just don't connect with the audience. They're giving a canned talk and they've talking to an audience of people who are all, work from home entrepreneurs. And they kept talking about going to the office and how your commute can impact you. And that was not the audience at all. So there's a lot of things that speakers can do to really, crap the bed, so to speak. But, not connecting with the audience is really what there is. The primary goal is to do that. So if you miss on any of those things, whether your presentation isn't great, your content's not great, or you're not doing a good job of telling stories, like that's where you're just going to be not remembered. And, that can be worse than standing out because you did something outrageous or controversial.
It's funny. I've given countless talks and stuff around the world, and I have definitely wet the bed a few times. Just, it's real. There's also some. At this point, at the age of 60, I don't do it that often anymore. But there are definitely recurring things, moves that we all do. One of mine for years was just being boring. And I like is in my more corporate time, and I felt like I'd gotten a couple of like negative comments or whatever from some executives in the company that I needed to tone it down a bit, and then I sort of made everything gray and flat, and then I got regular comments about how it's boring and I'm arrogant, and I haven't gotten rid of the arrogant thing, but I try really hard not to be as boring anymore. If you're going to be arrogant, at least entertain people, at least provoke them, at least.
Well, I mean, it's all different levels of speaking, right? Depending on what you're there to do. I think a lot of people start off in that presenting a specific slide deck. They're subject matter experts, or they're just presenting at work. And it's not exactly what we think of as keynote speaking. As you elevate through the different ranks, so to speak, of speaking, where you're at the point where you're being paid to give, an opening keynote at a major event or just any sort of conference, there's an expectation that you've gone beyond just being able to explain a concept well. You're a big champion of storytelling and,
Right.
and how that helps convey ideas better. And that's what we would like to see on the stage, is someone that can tell a compelling story and share valuable information. And like I mentioned before, connect with that audience. And usually you do that through stories. You could do that through jokes, but people also want that authenticity. So if it's authentic to you to be arrogant, then you can offset it with humor. And if it's authentic, for you to be quieter, then be quieter. I think what shifted is you don't have to be a Tony Robbins, rah, 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 getting people pumped up for every talk. It has to be authentic to you and the emotions and the feelings that you want to generate in your audience. It might not be getting them
I think
amped up.
Like unlocking your range. So like I in those days that I got the things for being a little flat, boring, and being arrogant, I focused a lot on making sure that my slides were ready and good. Like, and then that was before a lot of digital projectors. So if you're going to do a big event or a keynote or whatever, you'd send you'd output then we used Aldous Persuasion was the program way back once upon a time. And you'd output your stuff in at like some infographics place into slides. And then you'd send that. And then just to make sure, you'd bring the files with you, maybe on like a huge SideQuest cartridge of some kind. And you might bring overheads as well or something like that. So you're ready with your brief. And I was so focused on like having my content and the structure around it that I that kind of thing happened. And I gave a talk actually in Oman. I've only done one, but and it went well. But it was about to not go well because I showed up and I hated the hotel they put me in. And I'm like, this is a beautiful, cool country. And I'm in this awful, depressing place. And I'm not in a good, abundant, sharing, happy mindset. So I found the most beautiful place I could go to, which turned out to be the place where they were going to have the talk later. And I'm like, I'm going to go there. So I went there early and I went to the beach and went to the pool and chilled out and I really indulged myself. And then I'm like, okay, I feel great. Now I'm ready to give a talk, like I took care of myself so that I could be generous and free with people. Right. And then I went on from there to Pakistan and gave 2 talks in 2 different cities there. And I got a horrible stomach bug from some like bad goat or something, in Pakistan, as one might do in a place like that. And I'm like, okay, how am I going to give these talks and workshops? And I am not doing good, right? Like I did okay there too, because I balanced that, like taking care of myself, but being fully self-expressed, like just I'm going to give you everything and connect, And you like mentioned Tony Robbins being rah rah, and that's his style for sure. He has like a power and presence because he's like 1,000,000 feet tall and he's a huge guy and he deep voice and all that kind of thing. But then he also does that thing. He like looks into your soul and he's like, yeah, so how long have you been alone? Like and like in an audience of thousands, he connects with one human and gets quiet. Like that range of stuff. I just love that when a speaker is good enough to like have laughter and tears and the whole thing.
Oh, totally. I mean, I was at a conference a few weeks ago for the whole kind of speaker bureau, speaker agency industry, and we had our own share of speakers. And one of them said, this is theater. And I was like, wow, no one ever says that in this industry very much because, we think
Yeah.
of it in this entirely different category, but it truly is. It's 45 minutes, 60 minutes. You're not going to be able to distill your book into that long. You're not really there. You're not teaching even a semester worth of a course. You're really just getting a big idea, and how you do that has to entertain, has to connect, all those things that you said. And really truly though, that is the speakers who do the best ultimately are the ones who are really talented at adding art into their talk somehow, or and to your point, connecting with the audience in big and quiet ways, and are able to generate laughter and tears kind of simultaneously, seemingly. But yeah, it takes practice too. Some people are naturally gifted at it, but it takes practice for anyone. No one is naturally gifted at all elements. Everyone has their piece that they really need to hone and figure out. And it's hard to get a lot of time on stage, to work those things out. We talk about comedians going to small clubs to work out their new material. It's because you need as many at bats as possible. It's not because they want to be in front of small audiences. It's because it's the volume of working out just with a small sample group. It's their market research. So if you're working on your speaking, like use any opportunity you can to give that talk to organizations that might find value in it, or your local church and schools and places that are in your community, because it's the type of thing that's hard to practice just doing it on your own.
Yeah, more recently I've done vocal improv, voice coaching, and even stand-up comedy a few years ago. And all those things were deeply uncomfortable, embarrassing, awkward, right? But each one of them helped level up my speaking and presence and that kind of thing, freeing my voice, making me less self-conscious, right? Movement, vocal, voice, comedy was probably the most nerve-wracking, like following a script and trying to be funny for 15 minutes. Oh my God. In a room of people I don't know, like that's really, really awkward. But I think all those things make
people say
better.
Public speaking is yeah, I mean, it's a fear for a lot of people, like stand-up comedy and public speaking, but it's a really valuable tool. And whether, if you're a business owner or someone that's just trying to leverage your own time better, being able to speak in front of a lot of potential customers or your entire team and make an impression on culture in that way, that I just don't think a lot of people always take advantage of the different areas where speaking can be really impactful. And I think whether you're a business owner or a leader in any fashion, it's something that should be part of your role and part of your growth plan.
Yeah, so let's talk about your early career. In the beginning, you worked with authors to help them figure out how to tell stories and create. Tell us about that time and maybe some of the examples of the people that you worked with and what you did.
Sure. Yeah, I started off in New York in the HarperCollins Speakers Bureau. They were the first publishing house to have an in-house speakers bureau starting in 2005. And I kind of got to learn that this industry even existed. Wasn't even, I was kind of coming into publishing, just wanting to work in some facet of the industry. I already knew editorial and that side wasn't for me, and I was thinking more on like the publicity side, and this was something that was kind of in the middle. And I got to work with all different types of authors, like including Gregory Maguire, from the author of Wicked, because HarperCollins published all of his books. So that was, the book had already been out for a bit of time by that point. It's been around for a while, but I'm sure they're selling a lot more copies right now. So people like that, and that was the rare fiction author that you have to be one of the best sellers, one of the most known to really get booked a lot as a fiction author, I would say, like a Nicholas Sparks that I also worked with. And then otherwise it was looking at the nonfiction, the people that are talking about business or other tech topics and figuring out kind of what in the market is hot. Like, what are people actually interested in? And a lot of books get published because there's an audience for a lot of people that want to learn about something. But that doesn't mean that every book should be a lecture or is going to be a keynote that someone would pay to bring into their organization or see. So there's a filtering kind of all of that. So I just kind of got to learn on that side of it, and then I moved over to Hachette and Simon and Schuster, and I was working with this. I was running the Simon & Schuster Speakers Bureau and the Hachette Speakers Bureaus at the same time because they had a partnership with the agency that I worked for. So I kind of ran like an outsourced mini agency for both the publishers. And I was there at the time that Steve Jobs died. And Walter Isaacson's book was scheduled to come out a few months later, but given that occurred, they went ahead and rushed on getting it printed and released. And I worked with him on getting other things booked, even though he was with a bigger agency that was kind of a competitor to us. But I got to go with him to Brazil to do a big talk for InBev, the giant beverage company, and spend 48 hours in Sao Paulo just because they wanted him to come and talk about Steve Jobs and the Steve Jobs book. So that was pretty kind of crazy thing to do, young in my career, just kind of fun though to be able to do that, and got to ride around the city with him and listen to him talk about the book to a lot of different types of audiences and for interviews. And that was a pretty cool experience in like the publishing world / early career.
So what's the mistake or the gap that new speaker authors make, and what's the fix or the thing that makes it go well? What did you see again and again that people didn't do right, and then how did you shift it for them?
Yeah, well, I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make is just thinking that they can speak about anything, or they can put it in their own language, and that it's going to be, appropriate for every audience. Most people have imposter syndrome in the way that they assume that a lot more people know what they know. So they forget that their language is new to other people, that these ideas are new, that their goal as a speaker should be to really introduce these things, not at an expert level, but at an introductory level to get people interested so that they can build now a reputation and an expertise around being the person that talks about these things. So they sometimes are already over the head of their audience, and they need to bring it down to their level. They need to learn how to position themselves. And sometimes it's hard to do yourself. So I understand why people get it wrong, but they just take the book title and think that that's going to be the most translatable keynote topic, when really it might not be. It might be, you have to talk in plain language so that people know what the topic's about, and then you can introduce your specific word or methodology later as part of the keynote or as part of your speaking. So that's a big area. And I think a lot of people throw up a website, don't have any video, list 12 topics that they can talk about, and wonder why they're not really getting any traction. Well, you really need to try to get video. There's just no excuse anymore. You know, you don't need to wait to get booked for some major event to film it. You can go out and talk anywhere and film it. People just need to see you speak. You know, you don't even need an audience. I work with a lot of people, and we put together really high grade professional reels without them ever setting foot on stage, just so that they have something to work with to start with. And people want to know you as the expert in something. So if I see 12 topics, I just assume you know you can talk about a lot of things, but what's your actual expertise? What are you really known for? What should you be known for? So having your keynote topics narrowed down to 2 or 3 main things that are the truest to you, but that could potentially speak to a lot of different audiences because they're, you know, things that are more applicable. So I think a lot of it is just in how they position themselves, getting clarity on really what they should be focused on and how they should position and how they should talk about what they talk about in a way that's accessible to who is actually going to be their client, and getting some clarity really on who is the right audience. Not, this is for everyone. I can speak to everyone. No, you got to start niche. You got to start with, you know, if you're coming out of the insurance world, then focus on that world for now and where you can teach them, and then move laterally and grow, you know, into other sectors. But don't try to just address everyone. Like starting a business in general, start with the ideal audience, the ideal client, customer, etc., and really try to hone your positioning and messaging around that.
You know, when we get pitched guests, especially for the show, for sure every day some guest pitches come in, and we get also pitches for our events, for speakers at the events. And I notice some of what you say in all of those pitches that I just like drives me crazy. So they pitch me like 4 to 10 topics. I'm like, oh my God, no, just pick me the one thing, like an expert in public speaking. Great. Let's talk about that. Not, you know, well, he could talk about speaking. He could talk about publicity. He could talk about virtual meetings. He could talk about, like, these might all be subtopics, but what's that like one thing that you want to be known for and that you want to go out there, and maybe you choose wrong, but then put out another thing. But come at me with your best topic and then share stories with me. I don't want to hear like your 10, everybody explains their framework or their 10 principles or whatever. It's boring as hell. Your system for making $1 million or $1 billion. It's all boring crap and it's not reproducible, but stories like touch my heart. So come at me with a big idea and some great stories. I'm interested, right? Like so that's the biggest one I get at both all the guest pitches. And then even sometimes when guests come on, they're like, well, I write about that in the book. Okay, we're not reading the book. Tell me the story. Tell it to me now, not later. I'm never going to read your book if you don't get me interested now. But tell me 1 or 2 stories. You probably have 20 in the book, right? Like, I get that all the time with some of the guests, and every now and then we have to actually throw a recording away because it's just so boring, you know, because they're just saying a lot of basic things. On the other hand, then I see other people take the stage and they say something that I consider really basic, and people eat it up, and I'm like, wait a minute. Why is everybody so digging this thing? And it seems so obvious to me. And you spoke to that there. You're like, you make assumptions about what people know and that kind of thing. There's a whole bunch of, there's definitely areas or categories that I consider like, oh, everybody knows that. That's foundational. But I don't realize that, you know, half those people are half my age and they're at the beginning of their career and they don't know all that stuff. And it isn't like they haven't learned it yet, and they will eventually because it's not like at some level, but it's only basic to me because I'm have the experience that I have, right? Like, and then when I say things, right, and other speakers do this too, we assume all that like foundational information that people don't necessarily have.
Yeah, it's definitely true. And with speakers, because they're going to all these different events, they get to become the best students. So they're hearing from the other speakers, they're actually learning all these other concepts. But the people in the audience, this is probably the one time a year that they're not just business as usual, that they are getting kind of
Right.
exposed to maybe a new idea or a new concept. And so, yeah, it definitely can happen, and you can feel a little jaded about that. But that's really what I think fuels a lot of speakers is the impact that they can make, the learning that they can impart, and that's what they're drawn to keep doing it. Because as you discussed, there's a lot of unglamorous sides to it, a lot of travel, a lot of time not on stage, where some people might feel that connection and adrenaline, and a lot more time on your own and in between, and not so much fun all the time.
I think there's two talks that I gave that stand out above all the other in terms of their results. And one of them was I got asked to do a TED length talk. It wasn't a TED talk for the TED brand thing, but it was a TED length talk at a TED length kind of an event. And it was going to be 400 people. And I knew quite a few of them. I knew the audience, and I wasn't sure what to say. But I begged for, and then been given this slot. And I knew that it would really like help me at a sort of with a new business, a new stage of my career. And so I hired an old friend to coach me a little bit. And she was really great. She said, okay, who's your audience? And then what do you want to leave them with a little bit? And I said, well, kind of this. And still wasn't very clear. And she's like, okay, so give me like 3 stories or a few stories that you have around this topic. And I just shared with her. She's like, okay, just go tell those stories and then kind of tie it together with like one slide at the end where you say how they all interconnect. And I like did that, and people were like, it was a total mic drop moment. So we opened with the most like arresting, like, oh, I can't believe we're going there story. And then we went through some of the others, and there was laughter and tears and all that kind of thing. And then boom, like one kind of thing. And I think I got booked to do somewhere around 23 to 30 more speaking gigs almost immediately after that thing from other people who heard about it. Like that was awesome. But then I got some of them and they said, well, we like that, but we don't. Could you give us a talk about this? And I took that, and instead of using it like a politician and twisting it back to what had worked, I like went with what they asked for kind of thing. And some of those didn't go so well, right? They got into the sort of back to that boring zone of like just sort of utilitarian thing, right? And that's a thing that I love when people get up and do. Tell me great stories, and then somehow figure out how to connect them back to your point or whatever your framework
Yeah.
that you've got.
And you are the expert, and this happens. I've seen it happen with clients where the person reaches out and they're like, if the event planner is ever over involved in trying to craft the keynote, and the keynote presenter doesn't hold firm in knowing how to best present the material and maybe try to incorporate the ideas, but taking fully their direction, it almost always fails again and again because it's not authentic to you. It's not where you're feeling most comfortable. And that person, 9 times out of 10, isn't even the stakeholder. They're the person that's coordinating the event. They're trying to communicate. They're trying to think what their boss wants to hear or what someone wants to hear. And they're really worried that you got to stick to this one thing. And what they bring you in for is doing it your way. And like that's where I see people shine, where I can see there's some of my best clients are always asking those same questions. Of course, who's the audience? How do you want them to feel, or what do you want them to do differently as a result of this talk? And they go deep into being able to tailor to that audience, but that's like 10-20% of the talk. The rest is the meat and potatoes of the stories you share, then like you said, how you tie it all together. And I definitely caution speakers for letting people steer too much. And it's a delicate balance. Of course, you're in the service business, but it's almost like an artist. Like you hire an artist to come speak or come play, or you're not going to say like, oh, I want you to play this band's songs instead. They're going to play their songs. So that's that I've seen, and I always feel bad for the speakers because generally, yeah, it's not a success, and it doesn't lead to more things like you mentioned, which speaking is always going to beget more speaking, and everything else is, just ancillary to that.
Yeah, online meetings, Zoom and that kind of thing weren't invented in the pandemic, but early in 2020, right? We all started working mostly on Zoom for a while, unless you were like in a grocery store or that kind of thing, right? And then you were just terrified. So we all did that. And yet here we are. And I feel like some people took the lessons and they figured out how to upgrade their lighting, camera, mic, etc. And other people missed the boat, missed the memo, like didn't. What is it that people are still not getting right? What are the right things to do, and what are people still not getting right about the whole virtual stage?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that is still a marketplace. I have said often, I think one of the best things that come out of the pandemic was that virtual talks are now here to stay and that there's at least a value attached to them. Before the
Mm.
pandemic, I'd get one or two requests every so often for someone to give a virtual talk. Otherwise, it was not something that people were readily paying for, especially at the level that they pay for fees in person. So that shift obviously
Right.
happened immediately in the pandemic, but after, there's still a demand for that. Now, I think it has waned to some extent because, of course, a lot of meetings are being held in person. They want the speaker there in person and they're willing to pay the higher price for that. But there's a lot of ERG groups, there's a lot of different types of smaller groups or companies that have a lot of remote workers and companies that have offices everywhere. And they just can't afford to always have everyone in the same place at the same time. So virtual really makes sense. But it shouldn't
Yeah.
look like this. What I'm doing here is not me giving a virtual talk. The speakers who got it right built in their studios and home. They have a great setup, and you should be standing. You should be standing and giving your talk because you are presenting like you are presenting on stage. So setting up your studio, your home setup in a way that allows you to do that. And the people that
Mm.
started getting booked a lot then for lots of virtual gigs are the ones who adapted and then can show that on their website through their reels that they've got, great examples of them presenting virtually that looks beautiful, and I think a lot of people treat it more like sitting down for an interview or doing this or that. And you could probably get by with that, but it's not going to be as great as if you're really moving more naturally and you've got the equipment and the right technology that allows you to do that. The other thing that speakers really need to avoid, because I can tell right away, and the temptation is always going to be there, especially if you're doing it virtually, but don't use a teleprompter. You are not a newscaster. You are not a politician. You are being paid to give one presentation, and they want you to deliver it authentically. It's never going to
Uh-huh.
sound as authentic if you're reading it. You're not
Uh,
going to do as
uh-huh.
well. Practice if you need it to do it that way, but don't let too many of the tools then become a crutch because that will hurt you in the long run on how well people think you did. You got to be present. And that's part of the art of the virtual engagement that can be hard for speakers because you're not there with the people in the room and feeling the energy and kind of like knowing how to pace yourself. But like anything, it just takes more practice.
Yeah, so I'm using a teleprompter right now. And but not in the way we think of a teleprompter like a politician or a newscaster speaking. I'm
Don't
using
have
it
a
for the
full
Zoom meeting
script.
for eye contact, right? Like, oh, my camera's not on there. But I can see eye contact because your face is pretty much right over the lens. So if I talk to you, and then, my notes are on the two sides of it and I can go right to it. If I want to see, like if you look at the wide angle, you can see I'm actually looking into a thing there. There's not enough there, but you could use that. And there are inexpensive ones today that work, but reading your notes, right? If I were to go over and read the notes like verbatim, it would be really awkward. It wouldn't come across as connected and paced right and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I
simply.
mean about scripting out your talk. If it helps you to have
Yeah.
like an outline or some notes or whatever, great. Like you get some advantages because you're doing it virtually. I'm just encouraging you not to like type up the entire talk and then just read it out and assume it's going to come across the same way because it won't.
I was taught. I don't know if you've done this before, but I was taught, and I use sparingly this method today. But with either a particular section or a short talk where I'm going to script it all out, I would script out the entire thing, and then I would practice it in the mirror at least 10 times, maybe 50 times, delivering it until I can connect and deliver it in the mirror. And at some point, it's sort of memorized. And then at another point, I actually throw it away. But I'm never trying to read the notes or even refer to them in real time. I've just done it so much so that you could wake me at 3 a.m. and I could get up and give that talk. It's so like solid. But now I don't have to worry about like getting every word right. I can just like be like a martial artist who's learned a thing, and then it flows through them, and they can kind of just be with the whole thing. But there was scripting, design, ridiculous preparation around the whole thing, and now it seems natural, right? Like
Totally. And that's really how a lot of people do it. So I'm not saying never type it up, never script it. And I did the same when I was doing our like final capstone presentation. I got chosen in the group to be the presenter, which was both a heavy and light
yeah,
burden for me, but I practiced so much the day before that it was like you said, it just kind of flowed naturally. I was lucky to go in the morning. Every time I practiced it in like rehearsed or we had formal times in the morning, it could just flow right out of me. And then we in the afternoons, my mind was all muddled and it just wouldn't work as well. So I got lucky doing that, and it just felt perfect. But if you're someone then that's so rehearsed that if you get derailed, you can't pick back up. It's like you're talking about. It's really mastering. It is the flow state
fair.
of an athlete or an artist,
Yeah.
like a piano player. They don't need the book in front of them. They know the notes. But yeah, it's just the only way to do it is practice, and the way to hone the talk better, the content, is by having an audience. But if you just are comfortable with the
Right.
words and the content, then yeah, you can practice as much as you can at home.
Going back to the technology for a minute. So I upgraded the stuff and my tech setup at home, and because I knew I'd be working here a lot and probably continue long after in-person meetings. And then we see people like Tony Robbins, and he's got a whole he's got a multi-person production crew that's there doing like a live television event kind of thing. So he's got multiple people working on the control and people on the cameras and all that kind of thing. And it's a huge deal. And he's got, a million people out there or whatever. And then, and my level is way below that, but I have a video switcher, an audio panel, mic, lights, teleprompter. I've got 3 cameras, and I can insert graphics and things like that either on the screen or an overlay. I can do all those kinds of things, but I have a background as a DJ running my own show once upon a time. So running the board and that kind of thing is not a foreign thing, right? But you would want to do that otherwise. And you could just upgrade, get a little bit better camera, get a little bit better light, get a mic, put it on a stand, put some monitor or something in your ear. Like you could upgrade just a little bit off the basic things. Or even if you're all like on the road and you don't have everything, don't put a bright window behind you, put it in front of you. Like clean up the shot behind you, like basic things. Even if you're just talking to your own company group, I see this all the time. They're like, somebody's in, they got a bright window behind them or whatever. We can't see your face. I can't see your expressions. That kind of thing. Move the thing closer. Move the window closer to the camera so that you're making better eye contact. That pick the thing up off the stage. Like connect with human beings. If you can't connect with yourself, you certainly are not going to connect with anyone else.
That's right.
Yeah,
And it sounds like this is things that people should already be so familiar with.
But do they always? And I love it when I come across somebody and I'm like, okay, you're ready. You're ready to talk and be present and that kind of thing. So, you one of the other things you talked about in our prep and our notes and that kind of thing was a speaker in the healthcare industry, and I think that'd be a great. Before we run out of time, share one more story with us as about how they grew from just doing small things and then to paid gigs. And so, why don't you tell us about that?
Sure. Yeah, I've got a lot of different clients in different sectors. So, one of the clients that I've worked with for a long time has been an entrepreneur many times over and now is more in the healthcare space. So, her background has been in like computer science and AI and been doing that for 20 plus years and, starting back in undergrad and been talking about different ways that AI and machine learning and all of that can impact technology, et cetera, like what a lot of people are talking about now. But two of her latest startups are more in the healthcare field and is applying these different AI tools to pairing with epigenetics to develop the first postpartum depression test. So something that's not usually easily tested for and treated in advance, and
Mm-hmm.
other things like that that have created kind of a new channel of speaking and starting with like local organizations and other associations and leveraging speaking as a way to talk more about the startup, which has led to NIH grants and other funding models and other connections through that space that wasn't a native space for her, coming from more of like the tech specific world, the diversity world, the academic world, but leveraging some of her expertise in these other areas and then applying it to healthcare has advanced like on other sides of her mission other than just the speaking opportunity as well. So I think that's one area I've seen where people can leverage speaking strategically. This is kind of my whole thing is like, don't just look for paid opportunities. It's more about who is the audience and is it an ROI on that engagement? Is it more than just the paycheck to be there? Is there more that could come from that opportunity? Because most of the time, if you're just trying to make money off the engagements, you're not going to be satisfied with what you could typically earn. It takes a while to get up to the same level as what you're probably hoping for. But if you use it strategically and your speaking is helping either your coaching, your consulting, your digital courses, your books, your anything B2C or B2B, then any engagement can be worth six figures or more, just depending on if it's that right audience for you. So I think a lot of people get kind of blinded by like, oh, wow, these big keynote fees and I could make 10 grand a thing. And then you're flying around and, collecting checks, but it doesn't always add up to all that much if you're not actually fueling and building a pipeline from there. So I think people often are really focused on just, like I said, trying to think that they can talk to anyone, that they can really speak on a lot of things, and they struggle to connect. They struggle to connect and build an audience. Like you have to be very intentional about where you're delivering value or solving problems for these audiences. Just, you should want to hear me talk about this.
It's. I think that's a really good call out. Like, I have friends who regularly make 45, 75, 150,000 for their talks. Right? These are really great, consistent speakers. They're doing it again and again and again, and they still have a back end of something they sell or things that other ways that they monetize their talk. The middle one, the 75 one, less so. The lower and the 45 and 40 and the 151 for sure. They're selling other things in addition to getting a thing, but their craft is so developed. They are really great, and their names to varying degrees that you would know and recognize and want to book. So booking them and spending that money will pull people into your event. You book Bill Gallagher at a thing, I'm not going to be like a big draw. Not enough people know my name, right? I wish that was different, but, I'm not like a name in myself. But there are other people who have been, world stage, big authors, that kind of thing. And they are well known and they will draw. They have massive social followings or whatever it is like that. And they will draw people in. But I gave a talk once for airfare, right? Airfare and a night at a hotel. And I spoke in the 90s, and I gave a contrarian talk at a tech conference, and I was saying something different than everybody else. And enough people there were like, oh, thank God somebody said that or whatever. And I booked about $300,000 of work within the next hour to after that talk, right? I did it again at another major conference, doesn't exist anymore, in Vegas. And I booked another few $100,000, right? I got paid nothing for that. I had to drive myself and buy my own hotel room. But they're like, hey, you could come talk at Comdex, right? So I'm like, okay, I'm there. And I think sometimes getting paid nothing for something is one of your most lucrative talks, right?
Definitely, and I love that, and that's a great example of how this all works. Is in the bureau world, if they said, "Well, we don't pay our speakers," it's just a huge marketing opportunity. The bureau say, "Oh, that's great, nice, see you later," but that could be
Yeah.
the biggest opportunity that speaker ever had because you're in front of all these leaders, you're in front of all the people that are the decision makers, and even I love your point about being the contrarian because if you're a yoga instructor or you're like into like mindset breath work, don't go to the yoga breathwork conference where everyone's saying the same thing. Go to the stressed out people's conference and be the thing that they need. So
Yes.
thinking about it
Yes. Yeah.
strategically, you want to put yourself not in a room of just like-minded people who are all talking about the same thing. It kind of comes back to that thinking everyone knows what you know. In that case, they do. So no one needs you. You got to go where you're something new and different and so again, hopefully solving a problem for them that isn't what everyone else is talking about at that event. And guess what? That event that I'm talking about might be, a group that asks you to pay to speak at their event. And that then turns into multi-million dollar contracts or hundreds of thousands. But that's another model. Getting paid, is one, and you can ask for the least. You cannot really ask for much from them. They're paying you. You got to do what they want you to do. And you can hopefully, develop an ongoing relationship and, figure out a way to get a QR code into your presentation. And hopefully as much of the audience will get on your email list. And, I like to be strategic that way, get your B2C, goals met and advance your B2B goals. But then if it's a free event, like you're saying, okay, we're not going to pay you, but great, I'll talk for free, but will I get the list of all the attendees? Will I get, will you send out an email on my behalf with a link to this or this? Like ask for things that matter. Don't ask for, lanyards and your logo on a step and repeat or on a tote bag. Go for something higher. And that's the third is like actually paying, actually sponsoring an event. That's where you have the most leverage. Look on their website for this event. What are they charging for sponsorships? What do you get for this silver sponsorship? Okay, well, if I don't care about this lanyard and I don't care about this or that, would you give me XYZ? Would you do a post? Would you do this, that, or the other? You can barter these things. You can negotiate these things. These are businesses that are run by people buying sponsorships. These events are run in that business model. If you want to go into corporate, then yeah, you're going to have to figure out who makes the decisions there and make friends with the bureaus. And it's a whole nother channel. All of these other ways you can go direct and they might be if you're especially coming in the door as a potential sponsor or partner, they will have all the data on their attendees. If they're a good event, if they're an established event, don't go to a brand new event and invest a lot of money. Go to an event that's been doing it for a few years at least. They have a track record of attendance. They can show you their demographics and who they attract. And then you will have that information up front. So there's a lot of different ways that, yeah, as a speaker, you might pay for one gig because it's going to be in front of all your people and that makes the rest of your year. Or you might do a few pro bono things because they're strategic. And that's exactly what I mean when I think that this is a strategic speaking instead of just, okay, I won't leave my house or get on a stage if I don't get at least X amount of dollars. Like if that's where you're at, great. But that doesn't always mean you're making the best use of your time.
Well, recapping to close, wherever you're at is a great place to start. So begin there and then start moving up from there. But get out in front of all kinds of audiences. Be open to trying things. Think about who needs your message and go there with that. Get lots of practice and build that practice in there, thinking about the audience, the venue, the environment. Blair Bryant Nichols, bbncreativemanagement.com is the website and the link. We'll put it there on the show. We'll put it in the show notes as well. But worth checking out if you would like to up your game in speaking for strategic purposes for your company and whatever you're working on. Listen, it's been great talking to you, Blair. If you like the show, that kind of thing, there's 600 more wherever you got this now. Go like, subscribe, turn on your notifications so you get it every week. Go to our website, scalingcoach.com, and you can sign up for our not only our newsletter, but we do a workshop every month where we kind of get started in some of the things to do with scaling up. Anyway, I hope that's been helpful. Big thanks to my friend and mentor, Vern Harnish, who created the whole scaling up framework to begin with, and to the folks at StoryOn who produce our show each week. Christelle there in the background today, Seth, Cameron, and all the folks at StoryOn. We'll talk to you again next time. Keep scaling.